Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Veletsianos, and I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair on this beautiful campus. And this slide deck is set to move by itself, so I need to fix that before we continue. I don't even know how to use this device. Can I get some help, please? Can I end the show? Transitions. Let me see. Is that it? Yeah, that should be it. I think that should take care of it. So I'm going to start again. So I hope you've been enjoying the workshop so far and have been finding it valuable. I teach here in the School of Education and Technology, where we prepare people to tackle the complex problems that our education systems are facing, but also our society is facing. We prepare K-12 educators, principals, superintendents, people who work in higher ed, people who work in industry and in business, and so on. So sometimes their work involves making change in those education systems where they find themselves, and other times they make change in society by engaging educational approaches. I'm here today because part of my research agenda focuses on online abuse, harassment, violence. And my first study on this topic was in 2006. At the time, I was studying virtual characters and how it could be integrated in educational settings. And we would basically add these characters in various online learning environments so they could respond to student questions. One of those characters was a female presenting teacher. They were powered by a very rudimentary artificial intelligence engine. So they would basically match questions to responses and send it back, right? And we observed that there were a lot of mean, if you will, oftentimes violent comments directed towards this artificial character. And so in that study, we sought to understand what kinds of comments middle school students were sending to this character and sort of make sense of basically the gendered sexist language that was directed towards it using critical discourse analysis. In 2017, I picked up more on this work, working with my colleague Jagris Hudson, trying to understand the harassment that now humans were facing online and not just artificial characters. So since then, we've been studying different aspects of online abuse and harassment. My talk today focuses on the broad theme of data reporting. So I'm going to take you towards a different sort of aspect of all this work, and more specifically on mobilizing the knowledge that that we're generating when we're studying antisocial behavior online. So far, you've heard from my colleagues about data analysis, capturing data, various aspects of who manages and who moderates sort of the behaviors that we see online. And I'm going to take you sort of towards a different aspect of this work here, because reporting and sharing with particular people is also important in this work that we do. So these are sort of the three questions that I want us to explore together. What do you do after you gather and analyze your data? To whom should you communicate those results and how? And what are the different kinds of outputs that you could and should produce as part of your research? And rather than answering those questions for you, because we've all listened a lot today and sat a lot, what I want to do is to put our collective sort of imagination to use and explore them together, both here in the room and as well as in the online space. So my plan is to give a quick introduction to my interests around knowledge mobilization and some of my ideas. And then I want us to split into groups to discuss ways in which our research can reach different audiences. And we'll do that here, and again, we'll do it online. So put the online folks, our online friends, in breakout rooms. All right, so if we're ready, let's stretch a little bit. Our necks, you can shake a little bit. And if you're all with me, we can go. So many of us here are faculty members, researchers, staff members, people who have just added doctor in front of their name. Congratulations, Vicky. Yeah. Now we're all invested in this noble work of scholarship, of unlocking knowledge, and that scholarship can take many forms, right? It might involve discovering new ideas, integrating ideas from multiple disciplines, applying knowledge, creating new practices, new software, like our friends at the social media lab are doing, and so on. You might be trying to understand how particular groups of people experience antisocial behavior, or you might be trying to use large data sets to identify political extremism or bad actors, or perhaps you're trying to develop solutions to address issues of abuse and harassment. Perhaps you're trying to do this work in the context of higher education, or you're exploring the abuse facing journalists, politicians, nurses. Maybe you're doing this work in K-12 classrooms, in the context of schools, in the context of journalism, who knows? But regardless of what you do, what I'm here to tell you is that this work is important and it has the potential to improve our world for the better and to produce a more kind, a more gentle and peaceful world. And I know this, and I think you know this as well. But what some of us do is hide our scholarship. We mostly share it with one another. We tuck it away from broader audiences. We lock it up behind paywalls. And we write it up in such esoteric ways that only people reading it and understanding it are you and I. And surely there's a better way, right? That's what they say on Shark Tank. There must be a better way. We know some of the reasons that academics don't produce outputs for broader audiences in the same rate that they produce peer-reviewed papers, right? We don't have the time. We're not trained for it. Writing for audiences other than colleagues is not valued. And let's face it, sometimes it's even frowned upon. But there's an increasing realization globally that research should make meaningful and positive contributions to society beyond generating knowledge. And some of our traditions, like keeping our knowledge in inaccessible journals, constrains us from doing that. So in recent years, we've seen a multitude of ways that academics use to share their scholarship. Many of us, for example, publish YouTube videos, open data sets, write blog posts, dance on TikTok, join Twitter chats, write op-eds, or host live discussions on Reddit. There's an increasing desire, it seems, a yearning perhaps, to reach beyond the walls of the academy, to have greater impact on society. And perhaps this is what compels some of us to employ the tools that are available to us to broaden the reach of our work. And perhaps scholarly tweeting and op-ed and blogging and so forth are symptoms of how our scholarship is already changing, right? So if we return back to the idea of, is it the medium or the method? Perhaps what we're seeing here is that our use of these tools is a symptom that we are already changing, as opposed to saying Twitter is changing the way that we do scholarship. So for example, my research collaborators and I have mobilized our research in different ways. I'm just going to show you just a few examples from doing that. We've developed whiteboard animation videos like this one, and these videos combine images, sound, animation They're short and they tell a story. They're about 4 minutes long and they're freely available on YouTube. And they explain research results in simple terms, right? So whenever we write a research paper, we try to do something like this that says, hey, this is a really interesting topic. This is what we found and this is why we think it's important. We've written op-eds for different publications like The Conversation and Inside Higher Ed. And I know that a number of you have done the same. We've developed some simulations to attempt to make visible to others what it may feel like when people experience harassment. Right? And this is just a minor example, right? There might be video games that are developed to do a similar thing or other kinds of approaches. And some of our colleagues, like Dr. Jagers Hudson here, have developed podcasts that do similar things, right? Where they talk to people who have expertise and experience on a topic, where they can speak in ways that can approach broader public audiences. So the internet is a place of paradoxes and tensions, but it's our daily reality. And instead of isolating ourselves to closed journals and walled gardens, what I think we should do is to get out a little bit more and experiment. And in doing so, we should explore what may be some outputs and some activities that we could use to engage different audiences. So with that in mind, I'd like to pose the following question to you. What may be different ways to communicate research results with the following audiences? The general public, social media executives, or social media, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, boards or people who are decision makers at social media companies, university students, and policymakers at the provincial, state, and federal level. So these are the 4 audiences that I came up with, and what I'd like to do is form groups and think through the different ways that we can communicate our research with each audience. So in the groups that we'll join in a little bit, I'd like to discuss different methods and approaches that you can use. Perhaps it's from your research, perhaps it's from things that you've seen, perhaps it's from just general ideas that you have. But given the sort of collective intelligence in the room, both here and online, I thought this would be a good approach to explore sort of the tools available to us and the approaches that are available to us. I'll give you about 9 to 10 minutes for this discussion. And what I'd like you to do in your group is to assign a spokesperson. So that when we come back, you can tell the rest of us what you discussed, what you discovered, and why some of these methods that you've chosen are better than others. We should have breakout rooms for the online groups. So I'm going to ask Tiago here to send our online friends to different groups. And we'll come back in 10 minutes. And then for our friends here, what we could do is, if you're comfortable moving around, we can do that. If you're not comfortable moving around, we can have sort of discussions like this. We can get loud, it's no problem. Or if you're more comfortable, we can open the door and a group can go out there as well. And we can have 5 groups if it's better. I'm flexible and comfortable, and we'll take it however it works. I'm gonna set a timer for 9 minutes, and at the 9-minute mark, I'm gonna call everyone to come back. All right? Any questions before we go, either here or the online group? No? Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna have to break up the rooms now. Feel free to stay where you are or go back to your spaces if you're more comfortable, and give more room for air to flow. And I'll make sure that Tiago brought back the breakout rooms before I start. That sounds great. 45 seconds. Okay, so you have 45 seconds still. So if you'd like to. All right. Natalia, are we ready? I think they're back. Perfect. All right. Thanks for having conversations in those groups. The ones that I heard about were really interesting. So I'm looking forward to hearing more and to allowing our colleagues to learn from one another. If you're in the online group and you'd like to share with us what your group has talked about, please post a comment in the chat and we'll take a look and also include you in there. Not quite sure if you have the ability to speak. I think you do. Yeah, you can. So we can manage sort of the audio from that end. But I want to start with the group to my left here, who was dealing with the general public, which is quite a complex sort of audience.
Hello.
Yes.
All right. So for those that can't see me, my name is Rebecca Halliday, and we are the group that talked about different ways to communicate research to the general public and social media executives who were assigned those two. I think we mostly focused on the general public. And Jade, to my right here, rightly pointed out that, I mean, we were sort of going, okay, who is this? Who is this general public? And it started out sort of being anyone outside of academia. But really, we started looking at it from a marketing perspective and looking at who your end user is, or who your market is, or who your constituents are. And Vicky brought up an example of work that she and Jaggers have done on doing manuals on how to deal with online harassment for managers within industry. Philip was talking about a motto at the Social Media Lab: "Our end product is some other user's raw product," meaning their work is being utilized in a number of different capacities, some of which they anticipated, some of which they haven't. So we really talked about and anticipating need, collaborating to find need, communicating with constituents, and making sure that your research is applicable, it's usable in some form. We got to social media executives somewhat. But I think one of the challenges with that is obviously that these are, massive corporations and tech conglomerates, so it can be a lot more difficult to communicate with these particular parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of sort of this, defining this amorphous sort of general public, right? And saying, okay, which community exactly or which group exactly are we targeting and for what reason, right? Which I think is the point that relates to this question of, how do you talk to social media executives? Or like, who exactly is it that I need to direct some sort of an output so that social media platforms change the support systems that they have so they can better support users, right? Who is it exactly I need to talk to, right? Is it the CEO? Is it like coders at that company? And perhaps I need to change the ways that when these people go through their educational experience, they learn about some of these topics that we're talking about. Where does exactly that happen, and what exactly needs to change in what system, to be able to reach them. Um, any other comments from this group before we go somewhere else? Awesome. Okay,
I think
thank
we're
you.
good. We'll move on. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Um, let's go to our group over here. And you had university students and policymakers. So what did you discuss?
Yeah, so our focus was both university students, policymakers. We ended up also discussing like knowledge mobilization in general, and how hard it is to measure the visibility and the spread of it. Because like in terms of academic research, we can see like citations, etc. We can see, for example, if we publish something in the conversation, we can have some idea of numbers, who read it, but how to actually measure the impact, especially in terms of like policymakers. How do we know if that actually changed how they think about laws, how they think about policies? So that was one topic of our discussion. In terms of successful ways, timing seems to be really relevant. So sometimes we have a very interesting research, interesting results, but when we try to communicate it to journalists, to get the broader public or policymakers, they are not interested in that at that specific moment. So finding ways to frame our results and our findings in a way that is timely and we show how relevant it is to the topics they are discussing and they are interested at that moment, both for university students, like topics that are relevant or like buzz on social media, for example, and policymakers in terms of like what they are discussing in terms of policies and so on. It is really relevant. And that too, when invited to discuss something with journalists, for example, they are interested about the newest social media app or one specific meme and how we can connect and highlight our research in association to that topic. Specifically in terms of university students, it seems to be relevant to have some kind of network with colleagues. So for example, in terms of measuring the impact, syllabus and how our papers or studies are used for other people teaching is relevant to know. So when we have access to that kind of material, it's a good way to understand this impact. And also exchanging content. We mentioned, for example, Jagger's podcast and her group podcast. It is a very nice content, but when you have a group of other researchers doing similar stuff and that are studying or teaching similar topics, it is easier to know that this had some impact to those students and it was actually communicated to other students. And in terms of government and policymakers, it is often hard to get their attention. So actually knowing people and training some people who end up working at the government seems to be an effective way. It is harder sometimes because you don't know if they will end up working for the government. But having people there that you know they understand research and they are connected, they have similar values and similar ideas, makes it easier to communicate with them. And I don't know if anyone else in the group would like to add something else.
I love this idea of cultivating relationships, right? And then trying to instigate change through those networks. But also this notion of sort of indicators of impact and what it means, right? We often look at our citations, say, and might argue, oh, well, I have like X number of citations. That must mean that I might have an impact. But I would argue that we need to look a little bit beyond those numbers, right? So what if I wrote a bad paper and everyone that cites me says, yeah, George is a bad researcher. He doesn't know how to do like qualitative analysis, right? Um, which which I think is a really interesting part around, okay, how do you look at impact on, say, a policymaker, right? In which case, it might come back to you in something like, a letter that says, wow, like I read your op-ed or whatever, and that led me to think about my research or my work or our policy in these different ways, right? So we need to have some sort of like a continuum of evidence to be able to evaluate sort of the work that we do and the impact that it has had. And Anatoly was, I think, indicating that there's people online that would like a chance to speak, so I'll turn to that.
So Chucks, if you can hear us, feel free to turn on your mic and webcam if you're comfortable, and we're looking forward to your comments. You're gonna be on our live screen here as well.
Okay. I think I'm not comfortable turning up my video, but my mic is on now. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. That's perfect.
Okay. Yes. In our group, although I joined it, I was in group team 2. Nothing was happening before I was moved to the other team. What I've observed from Africa, speaking from Nigeria, is that communicating results to policymakers, if you don't actually try to paint a picture of what looks like implicating to them, they don't usually give you attention. Also, in the course of conversation, maybe we can also talk about it, whether it's also an anti social behavior, because I discovered that leaders in Nigeria, until the results that you are presenting at the social media or trying to put out there for the public implicates them or put them in the bad light, they don't seem to give you the considerable attention that you need, or you don't communicate to them. If it's just a flat thing, they just wave around it and go. But when it becomes implicating, or it puts them in the bad light, that's a trend that I've seen that gets their attention, especially here in Nigeria. I don't know what happens over there. I don't know if it's the same experience, but that's what I was trying to explain in our group before I was cut short because of time. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, absolutely. And sort of the the notion of different contexts and different ways that we need to do this relevant to our context is really important. So thanks for that comment. I see that we're coming up to our time here, so that's all I had actually. Thank you for engaging with me and exploring this. We do have a couple more minutes for Q&A. I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, we will take our break. So looking to Anatoly to get a sign of what to do next.
So we have just a couple of minutes for break, since we started your session 5 minutes later.
Sure.
So if there are any questions online or in the room, now's your time to ask them. And Jenna has a question.
Thanks, George, for facilitating that conversation. In our smaller specialist research meeting yesterday, we kind of ended in this topic of knowledge mobilization and the importance of it. And where our group today kind of ended was trying to think about the impact of that, of your various knowledge mobilization activities. So as we know, the metrics in and of itself don't paint a full picture. But if you are an active researcher who is committed to knowledge mobilization, there's various different tools. A podcast, you can create a video, you can write an article, you can write a public report, you can create a website, you can, all of these various tools. But everything ends up being a cost-benefit analysis. You want to have as large of an impact as possible. So what advice would you give in terms of assessing what are the best strategies on how to go about selecting amongst the various tools, and what are the strategies that you use when you are considering your knowledge mobilization in your research projects?
Thank you. That's a great question. Difficult to talk about strategy. I think you're right to think about, getting sort of the most bang for your buck, right? So perhaps like tweeting every day might not give you sort of, you know, the same return as writing, say, an article for the conversation. But my suggestion would be to approach this sort of intentionally and with the idea of creating a portfolio of evidence of impact, right? And that portfolio, including sort of a diverse evidence of that kind of impact. So, you know, yes, metrics and other kinds of citations, alt metrics or whatever you might include there, but also things like, you know, letters from a politician, or unsolicited emails from people who, you know, stumble upon your research, or like emails from you know, conference attendees that attended a presentation, and so on. And if you're, you know, sort of in a more senior position like I am and like many of you are, when you see your colleagues present, do send them those unsolicited emails, right? Or if you invite them to your classroom to speak, send a letter back and saying, hey, thanks for, you know, being an invited guest, and so and enumerate, you know, the impacts that they may have had on your students and so on. So that's how I would approach it. But at the same time, we also need to think back to, you know, where we might already be that we might have an impact, right? So like, for example, I'm not on Instagram, right? So I'm not gonna go start an account on Instagram if I don't quite know, you know, how the algorithm works and what communities are there, if I don't see sort of a way for me to expand my audience there. Maybe I see a way to expand my audience there, and I might approach it, but I might start with the communities that I'm already sort of in, right? Like, I don't know, Reddit and other stuff. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
For just one quick question. Well, yeah, I think we can close it, and we have a break. We can chat more about knowledge mobilization strategy. Thank you, George.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.